Welcome to the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of global legal law firm, ISOs, fintech, PayFacs, agents, merchants, processors, acquiring banks, and card brands. If these terms mean something to you, this podcast is for you. If these terms aren't so familiar, this podcast is even more for you. We hope you enjoy this episode of PEP, the Payments Experts Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Payments Experts Podcast. Today, talking about the match list. We have Bryce Vandermoor, Senior Associate Attorney at Global Legal Law Firm, and Managing Partner, James Huber. Welcome, gentlemen.
Bryce, start us off. Pop quiz. What does MATCH stand for?
Member Alert to Control High Risk.
All right.
We need an applause button, don't we?
I spent all day making sure that I was
Memorizing
going to
it.
say that right.
So for a little history, we have been dealing with merchants placed on MATCH since roughly 2008 or 9. And when people would come to us about MATCH issues saying, hey, how do I get off this list? Our understanding was good luck. And our experience was good luck. Maybe we would get a couple people off, but back then it was, it's probably not worth your time. How about you just, do something a little different, reorganize your business or, some other tactic. That started to change during the Obama years, the beginning of the Obama years. Our theory is here comes regulation, and we're going to start looking and, putting people on a list that's going to put them out of business might invite some scrutiny. And then, after those years, things started to change again, and we had a little bit more trouble getting people off. But then COVID came around, and people were getting matched for all sorts of things because for the first time ever, a lot of online merchants got matched because all of a sudden, a good example we have is a pool supplier who's selling online pool supplies. His business goes up by 8,000x, and buying pool supplies is, I'm told, very difficult because you need a certain kind of filter, a certain kind of chemical. And people had been doing it in a store, and now they're trying to do it online. And so they got a lot of chargebacks. And, there's problems with fulfillment and supply chains issues. So people were getting matched through something that they did not do. And we were getting, 20 merchants a month contacting, and our success rate for a while was, what would you say it is, Jeremy?
Over 85% for a while.
Over 85%. So
right out of COVID.
We're smiling ear to ear because we all have these issues with match, and that's continuing. We're continuing to see. I wouldn't say our percentage of success is high because our volume has gone up so much
Dramatically.
But we've really enjoyed this fight because we have a really big problem with the match list and how it's run. And, Bryce joined our firm shortly before this time where we were having a huge influx of match and quickly started, flexing on this. And, Bryce, what's your biggest beef with the match list?
Well, my biggest beef is just the fact that, we have so many clients who just come to us and they just don't know what's going on. And so you have a uneducated customer base that we're dealing with. And at the same time, there's just too quick of a rush by whatever entity is putting them on match to just do it. If there's even an inkling that they might be behaving badly, they'll just match them just to be on the safe side. They won't really do any legwork. And then you're out of business for 5 years. And if I can back up a little bit, one of the things that I learned about match is that it's extremely difficult to be a merchant nowadays. The cards are really stacked against you. Now, online entrepreneurship was something that I really wasn't that aware of until I came to work for this firm, but it's evidently a really big thing. And once COVID came along, it really took off because You had brick and mortar stores, their customer base dried up. They got to move their product. They got to make their rent. They got to make their overhead. What are they going to do? Well, online entrepreneurship was the answer. So they're rushing to these payment processors. They're rushing to these independent sales organizations, otherwise known as ISOs, and they want to get set up as quickly as possible. They're cutting every corner, and so as a result, they're getting set up, and they're signing all the documents, and they're getting running, but they don't know what it is they're supposed to do, and more importantly, what they're not supposed to do. And so 9 times out of 10, our client is calling us up saying, I've been put on this list. I've never heard of it before, and I don't know why. Nobody will tell me, and nobody will show me what I've done, and I don't know how to get off it. Please help me. And that's, kind of the biggest part of the success that we've had is just reaching out to the processor or the bank or whoever and just getting them to just take a look at the, whatever the transgression is here that got them matched. And once they take that look and we ask them to, really evaluate how strongly you feel about the evidence that you're using to support this match placement. I mean, we're talking about 5 years of no payment processing, which is just a death sentence for companies. And so you really should be sure that you're doing the right thing before you pull that trigger. And so, we come along, we get them to take a look, we get them to evaluate their position, and 9 times out of 10, they'll say it was an error, and they'll push MasterCard or Visa or whoever to remove them.
To that point, I'm sorry, James, I don't want to pose a question to the both of you.
Yeah.
Because, Bryce, you make a great point there. The match list was intended, and correct me if I'm wrong, to catch bad actors in the payment space, generally speaking. Can you speak to that, James, and Bryce, in terms of, I think what Bryce is kind of alluding to is most of our clients are not bad actors, and yet they're ending up on this list anyways. Talk about that.
All of our clients are not bad actors. But no, the purpose is, to protect cardholders. And there's an argument, we'll run into, and maybe we'll get into it later, of one of the reasons that the processors won't take a merchant off of match is because there's language in the card rules. I think it was like 2 years ago it got put in there. If you take somebody off of match and they do something bad later, you're going to be liable as the processor. Now, I'm relatively certain that's never, ever happened. But, why would you want that liability? So one of the issues we run into is we have a merchant that's been placed on match. We're going, hey, here's the reason code. Why did you put them on match? And, let's say it comes out something saying, hey, they're selling Bitcoin and you're not supposed to be doing that. We all know that you're not supposed to be doing that under the rules. So we're going, no, that's not this. It's coding to this website. It's not their website. So we show them that and they go, okay, we'll take them off. Or no, we still won't because we're just feeling worried about it. Then we'll sue them. And we get into discovery. And through discovery, that's where we ask them for documents and information and maybe depose somebody. They do the same thing to our guy. And let's say they find out, there is something wrong here, actually, that was going on. It's not why we matched you, but there was some trouble going on. We're going to look at it and, no, you should be on match. We thought it was because of this stuff. We had a hunch, but, it turns out we were right or we were wrong and there's something over here. I look at that as, I arrested the guy, beat him up, and put cocaine in his pocket. I found the evidence later, or I went to his house and it turns out, there was, drugs at his house. So, he should go to jail anyways. The difference, of course, is in the scenario that I was just stating, there's due process requirements and all of that evidence that they got later, everything, a good criminal defense attorney will get that all excluded. In case with match, there is no due process. In fact, most of our clients find out that they've been placed on match when they go apply for their next merchant account. And I see that as we see that as a due process violation.
Well, and there's like a reasonableness standard
right
at play here. And that's about as vague a standard as it gets. I mean, what is reasonable to one person may not be reasonable to another, and certainly does not warrant a 5-year lockdown on your ability to payment process. But going back just a little bit, these don't be swayed by how friendly these payment processors may be when they're looking at your chargebacks or looking at your processing. They're looking at it with the mindset that you're already doing something wrong. They're not looking to find out, why is this person approved to sell umbrellas, and yet this customer is trying to move a chargeback saying that you sold him a laptop. They don't like jump to the conclusion that maybe the customer is just saying whatever he thinks he needs to say to get the chargeback approved. They're saying, oh my gosh, this merchant is clearly transaction laundering, and transaction laundering is basically processing a payment for a product that you were not approved for originally. And by the way, we were talking about bad actors earlier. That is what is basically will get you called a bad actor, is fraud or transaction laundering. And when you look at it closely, it's not intentional fraud. It's not intentional transaction laundering. They just don't know what they're doing is wrong. And unfortunately, under the current system, you don't find out that what you're doing is wrong until you get caught. And I think that if the processors and the other entities that handle these merchants, if they would just take the time to educate these merchants as to what they can and cannot do. You cannot process payments for a product that you were not originally approved for. That's going to get you nailed every single time. I think that their merchants would get terminated less. I'm sorry, it's kind of slaughtered that, but their merchants get terminated less, and they get more profit from the processing.
So what's the disconnect then? Why aren't these processors educating their merchants more? What's going on in the real world? Why this doesn't happen?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that the merchants that work online are predominantly young people. They got stars in their eyes. They're going to make millions, and they just don't have time. And then you have a system where the processor or the ISO, thinks that they've done their due diligence by putting a link in a merchant application in like 10-point font that says, hey, by the way, click this link because this lays out all the rules that you have to follow, and they feel like they've done enough. They clearly haven't. And then the second problem is that match is an archaic rule, and it clearly needs to be updated. And quite honestly, the processors are kind of in a no-win situation, and they can get nailed by the card brands themselves if a merchant is not matched, and then go down the road, they break a rule again. So I mean, what is the processor going to do? They're gonna match the merchant and not run the risk of that merchant nailing them again down the road.
Well, I think there's an antiquated system on both sides. I think a lot of the merchants that are on Match, aside from, the just mom and pops that, for whatever reason, they got a bunch of chargebacks or whatever. But if we're talking about, high volume online merchants, which are the ones that, get matched, they have a huge reserve balance, and, really creates issues for everybody, is the name of the game years ago for these online resellers was get them a mid, get it approved, let's get it live for 3 months. Everybody cashes out. Yeah. Great, we're doing great. Now that might be good for the processor short term, but what these, the processors who really popped the system and were cranking e-commerce, doing free trial, doing Nutra, their banks started getting popped, and now they're shut down, and you're having to find a bank, or you're having to go back to these merchants and educate them on the back end, of how to, process this without trial, or try to make it not look like trial, or, Chargebacks 911 just had an FTC complaint against them. I mean, in the allegation, it says that, they were running friendly transactions for them. So, which is microtransactions to offset the chargebacks. So, that's a whole separate issue, but that's a way bigger problem than, as Bryce was saying, is what the processors and the ISOs really need to do is talk to the merchant about structuring their business the correct way. Most processors and ISOs have multiple different banking and processing relationships with different risk tolerances who will take their business as is. And if there's an issue, hey, you've got this other business or whatever that sells Kratom, let's get into it and make sure that these are separate businesses. Here's your name. This really sounds like somebody selling, Bitcoin. Let's take a look and structure your business to make sure that that doesn't come through. So the front end education will get you way more longevity and will preserve your bank and processing relationships and make you more money. And then the same thing for your merchant is get a merchant who will jump through those hoops to set their business up, and you're going to have a better partner, and that's going to help you with your underwriting too. If they're going, no, I don't want that, fine. Let them go, run crazy somewhere at a, relationship you don't care very much about or whatever. But, there is, a level of merchant advocacy that I think there is, a tremendous opportunity of having it be done right. A lot of work that we do on the front end and sometimes after someone's on Match is we write an opinion letter. We go, hey, here's all the concerns related to this business. Here's how they're in compliance with that business. And I'll tell you what, if you do that for your clients, one, if you get, help get them off Match or get them approved while they're on Match, you're the messiah. They've got a, picture of you in their room and they're kissing it on the way out the door because you're making them a ton of money. Because if you can get them qualified at lower rates because they're compliant, or get them qualified at all, or get them, traditional onshore processing, they're sitting pretty. Because a lot of these merchants, that's their biggest barrier. Most of these guys, they have their fulfillment, they have their shipping, they have all of that figured out. Processing is their biggest problem.
And the merchant that does have some personal responsibility, I know that nobody is really making them aware of what they're getting themselves into. But these merchant applications are no joke, and the ramifications for screwing up are very real. They're usually for about 3 years. And if you're terminated within that 3 years, you're still on the hook for all the processing that would have been enjoyed by the ISO or the processor if you had not been terminated. So, you're signing a contract that you don't fully understand. You're not being told how to process. And so if you get terminated, how does being 22 and being sued for like $500,000 sound?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a good way to start your career.
No, and it doesn't work out for our processing clients all the time either, especially if it's a one and done. These blowout merchants that jump from shop to shop, sure, we can get them, when we're representing the processor, we can get money from these individuals. But a lot of these guys, they blow out the account. Maybe you get an early termination fee, but your bank's pissed off because you jumped above the threshold. Now they're getting a visa investigation. And we've seen it, a lot of times the bank or the processor will say, it's all this one client's fault, and we'll get into it and go, well, no, you had a ton of these ISOs. It's not our one client's fault. But in some cases, we've seen it where, no, it was this one merchant who exploded. Great, you shut him off after, it's even a matter of days. But how did these guys get through? The underwriting for these should be rigorous.
It's not. It's clearly not rigorous.
Well, for clients that aren't ours, but all of our clients' underwriting, of course, is very rigorous. So,
well, yeah, ours is what we see when we're hired. When we get into it, it's very clear that there's a lot of looking the other way.
And the bank is supposed to be doing some of its own underwriting too, and we almost never see that.
Yeah, we almost never.
Typically,
see that.
It's the bank who is at least providing the access to put someone on match.
Well, and I don't know if I assume that everybody realizes this, but the bank has the ultimate responsibility for the behavior of the ISO and the processor.
They're supposed to.
Everybody involved in this transaction.
Right.
The buck stops there.
They're the ones with all the license and all of that, but usually when you get up to them, and we've deposed many bank board members and all of that, and they'll straight out admit, no, we weren't really looking at that.
Yeah, but getting back to the actual placement, when we get into it with them, it's clear that they're not. In some cases, and with some processors and ISOs, they do their investigation before. Well, I assume they do the investigation before they place them, because we had one.
But they don't. They do it on a hunch.
Yeah, we had one where they terminated him. They made the decision to terminate him in 4 hours. 4 hours, and then they did a bunch of investigation after they terminated him.
And even conscripted, services to have these reports to go, look, what we did was correct, and we're looking at the dates. We're going, you did this after, and they're like, no, we got it all done in that 4 hours.
Yeah.
Well, it's dated after.
Yeah, and what if all your investigation had led to the wrong result? I mean, what would you have done then? The door's already closed.
Maybe pick up the phone and call the merchant.
Yeah.
See what they have to say.
Yeah, that's a novel concept.
That is I've almost never. I don't think I've ever seen that happen.
I don't think we have.
No.
Where they contact the merchant prior to putting them on match.
No.
We've never
Like
seen that.
you said it earlier, James. The vast majority of our clients, if not all of them, never even knew what the match list was until they find out that they're on it.
And they oftentimes don't get noticed.
No notice.
Sometimes they do. They send out, hey, we've terminating your file. We're putting you on match. We're not talking about TMF much, but TMF, I do know what that stands for. It's terminated merchant file. That's Visa's list.
Yeah.
But these are separate lists with different criteria. I don't think everybody checks TMF. I do think it's worth noting also is that a processor, we've been saying, it's a, touch of death if you're placed on match. But the card brand rules still say, and always have since I've been looking at them, that be a merchant's placement on the match list, if they're on it, cannot be the sole criteria for denying the account. Yet we've found that they all do that. You can't get approved if you're on match, generally. We've
actually been privy to, I think, internal employment manuals where it just says, if they're on match, we won't take you, period. It's just treat them as like they don't exist.
The other thing that I think is really important that we've learned through this was we watched a training video from MasterCard that says, a lot of merchants get charged back. I'll back up. A lot of merchants get placed on match for high chargeback levels. Mm-hmm. For match, you're only supposed to count the MasterCard chargeback levels.
Yeah.
And that was news to me, and I think that was news to would be news to a lot of people.
It's if I understand it correctly, it's $5,000 in MasterCard charges, and you go over 1% in a month.
Right.
And then you might get tagged. I
and that's a hard criteria to meet for smaller accounts that we see get matched because they're doing it off. I mean, most people, I think Visa is the predominant card for all transactions, and they're counting all. They're saying the whole chargeback. We had to match them because they're above the threshold, or are they above the threshold for MasterCard?
Well, and the story is always the same from the merchant. I was early in my business. I didn't know what I was doing. I've put in these remediation plans. I've hired like a chargeback 911 to help me manage my chargebacks. I promise them we'll do it again. But MasterCard sits up on its mountaintop and, does not communicate with anybody, which is actually another problem that, MasterCard ultimately controls all this. They, the processors and the banks can recommend to MasterCard that they be removed, but MasterCard has the ultimate decision.
I've never seen them say no. Though.
No, I never have. Well, no, they did once.
MasterCard said no, even though the processor said
well, the client embezzled.
Wow.
He embezzled some money, but it was like like, remember that one? He was like, it was like 10 years ago, and he'd gone into like a treatment program,
I
and
remember
he
that one.
totally turned his life around. And they were just like, but my point was that, MasterCard hires companies, and one of them is called, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, I think everybody knows this, but it's called G2. And what G2 does is it just scours the internet for any, what it perceives as bad behavior that it can hang on a merchant. And when MasterCard sees something that it thinks is wrong, it'll contact the processor or the ISO and say, hey, terminate this guy.
Visa does the same thing.
Yeah, and so we'll get involved and we'll be like, hey, provide us the documentation that you're using to justify the match placement. And they'll say, well, MasterCard told us to do it. And I'm like, okay, well then go tell MasterCard to give it to you. And MasterCard just refuses to communicate with anybody or provide anything. So again, you have due process violations all over the place being committed by a major corporation, and nobody really seems to care. It's just business as usual. I mean, you're guilty until proven innocent. And you're never going to get the proof that'll exonerate you, ever. And so you just have to sit there and wait for 5 years or get enough scratch to take on one of the biggest companies in the world. Good luck. I mean, we have many, many cases that are just ripe for litigation, and they just don't have the money.
Well, I touched on this earlier. A lot of our litigation goes because they're saying, no, we won't take you off. And we've had cases where they'll litigate it, and still say no. And in those cases, we've gotten, nice sized checks for our clients. And by this point, they contacted us maybe a year later, when they found out they were on match, because sometimes a processor will approve somebody on match and without knowing, because maybe they didn't check the list. But they, so it's been enough time. Now we've been litigating, and there's maybe 2 years left, and the processor will still go, no, we won't recommend removal, but we'll pay you for all of your lost business. So we've had cases where we'll go, forget the money, just take them off of match.
Yeah.
And the processor still goes, no, we would rather write a very large check that, compensates for this rather than admit we did something wrong. And I think they, their off the record arguments are, if, we admit that we're making a mistake over here, what other mistakes are we making? And we all know tons of them. So what's one more? And this is one single account. And, I've even had an attorney for a processor off the record, we're heading into trial, and he's going, he's worried about his case. We're in arbitration. And, he's going, look, we all can agree that the match system is fatally flawed and broken. It is, shoot first, check later. Mm-hmm. Put somebody on the list on a whim. Put somebody out of business on a whim.
And ask questions later.
Or not.
If at all, yeah.
If at all.
And so, it is unfortunate. We do run into clients where they're saying no, and we're saying, go ahead, you have to sue, and they're going, I don't have the money. A majority of our clients get dropped off the list, if at all, upon a letter or two. If sometimes it's the first letter, sometimes, we send the letter and they say no, and we go, yeah, take a look at all this. And then they go, okay. And so one thing that we've tried to do different from our competition is, some of our, the other law firms out there, they charge 10, 20K a pop to get these merchants off of match. We charge a fraction of that because we know, and they'll flat fee it. We'll do way less because, one, we do more volume than, any other attorney out there. All the processors have told us, and they say, oh, price again, because I hear from them all the time. And so, we do it much less because, one, most of the time the processor who brings these to us, they're a client, or the ISO who brings us to us is the client, and we want to, make it affordable. But it's two, because while we're a business trying to make money, we also, have always taken ourselves as the Keystone cops in the electronic payments industry. There's not a lot of regulation in this industry. There are some bad actors, and we would like to, see it clean up, because this is a remarkable industry where people can make, careers for themselves. So we like to take volume on these cases to push that change needs to happen. You know, we're doing enough of these and suing enough of these that eventually, well, they're already sick of hearing from Bryce, but eventually they're going to get really sick of, you know, seeing our letterhead over and over and over, making the same arguments until someone gets wind and goes, all right, let's just change it. So that's our ultimate goal, and why we say, you know, hey, merchant, come on in. Let's discuss how we're going to do this. And it's much less than the other people. And we're told we're much more successful than the other ones, too. Not to toot our horn too much, but that's, you know, straight from the processor's mouth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, most of the time it's just getting somebody to look, because we're going to the legal department. The merchant is just talking to some customer service rep, and they're just doing what they're told, and you know, I mean, they want to keep their job, and ultimately they don't care. You know, I had a call with a Square representative, and I just got a taste of what a merchant has to go through. I had a hell of a time even finding a phone number in regard on their website in their terms and conditions. I mean, I spent like an hour just pouring through it, trying to figure out how to even to get a hold of these people, because sending them an email, good luck. I mean, you just might as well, you know, just sending it off into the
void.
And so finally, I got a hold of somebody. He clearly did not want to talk to me. Even though I offered to, his thing was, well, I'll only talk to the merchant. And I'm like, well, dude, why do you think you're talking to me? The merchant has made like 5 attempts to talk to you. And so he gave up and got a lawyer. And I offered to give him proof of my representation several times. He wasn't interested. He wouldn't give me a name. He wouldn't give me an email for the legal department. He just basically told me to send a letter snail mail to the agent for service of process. And then I went to the terms and conditions, and I actually filed a demand for arbitration. I'm hoping that will get their attention. But I'm just like, God, if I have to go through this, what does a merchant have to go through? And
They've got no chance.
It's just, and I understand why most of the time they just give up.
Can I tell you from, you know, again, we've been doing this a long time now, get a lot of calls from potential clients who are interested in getting off the match list. And, you know, we have our call, we kind of talk about what our process is, and they hear about what you were describing, Bryce. Hey, we're just getting their attorneys to take a closer look at these. And they think to themselves, I can do that. Sure enough, 1 month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, they're calling us back, because that's what's happening, Bryce. They're getting nowhere. They're sitting on hold for hours with customer service agents. We go directly to their legal department. We're dealing with their decision makers. It makes a difference.
Well, and there are legal departments at some of these ISOs that they just won't talk to non-lawyers.
Right.
And ultimately, that's the only way you're really going to get any movement is if, I hate to say it, is if a lawyer looks at what, you know, they've done and says, hey, this is just not cool. You got to cut this out. You got to let these guys off. But to change the subject a little bit, because I assume that we're kind of running low on time.
We're getting towards there, but this has been great information, and there's still a bit more to give.
I just want to I'd be remiss if I don't just mention my biggest beef with the match list, and that is being matched for identity theft. That one drives me absolutely insane, because I still haven't figured out how to get around it. Being matched for identity theft means that somebody took your personal information and tried to open a merchant account, you know, somewhere with it, and they figured out that it was a fraudulent account, so they shut it down. But then they also blacklist your personal information, so that, you know, so
you're a victim twice.
You didn't do anything wrong.
Twice. Yeah.
But I'm still going to put you out of business for 5 years, and nobody seems to be doing anything to help the innocent merchant. They're just not interested. And, you know, so that's just another example of how the match list is just antiquated and quite honestly, just ridiculous.
Well, right. And the theory, I'm guessing, on that one is, well, you know, they're a liability because they're not protecting their personal information. But at that point, there's enough stuff in place. You know, you get the free credit repair and all of that stuff to make sure that it's not happening anymore. And we go to them and are saying, this won't happen again. If it does, it's just as likely as anybody else out there to happen, actually less, because, you know, I I haven't heard of many people that get, the massive identity theft multiple times anymore because the tools exist to prevent it. So,
but why is a merchant being shut down by his own processor or his own ISO
right,
for identity theft?
It's really me.
When they've confirmed already that your identity has been stolen. But
and usually they confirm that the identity is stolen before it's even approved. So it's not like that other account went live and went rampant. It was just like, oh, nope, fraudulent account because, driver's license doesn't match the social. He's been identity theft, match him.
Yeah, and they always tell us, again, being matched is not a prohibition on payment processing, and being matched for identity theft is really not a prohibition on payment, being able to get payment processing. Oh, I'm like, oh, really? Because you're shutting them down right and left, and you're confirming for me that the merchant didn't do anything wrong, but you won't touch him with a 10-foot pole. I mean, that's just not right.
So, Bryce, James, as we come to the end here, the match list is antiquated. It's a net that's far too wide. There's no due process. There's almost no notice, at least not always. Someone listening to this right now very likely is probably in a very similar situation where they're angry. They're on the list. They're trying to figure this out. They found our website. They found Global Legal Law Firm. Where is their hope? Is there hope for them?
Yeah, I think absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
A lot of times it's the processors going, oh, you're on match. Instead of going, hey, we can't take your business, it's, hey, call these guys. They can probably help you out. And a lot of our clients go, hey, we'll pay for it too, because they know if we get them off, they're good to go. Then the other thing we can also do is when somebody's on match, we'll write an opinion letter saying, one, we're disputing this. It was wrong. Here's all the reasons why. And then they'll get an approval going, yeah, oh, actually, that totally makes sense. We all know that the match list is completely arbitrary and based on somebody's hunch. No, we'll go ahead and approve this. We're going to be watching you, but we'll approve it.
Yeah, and you got to remember, these processors have, thousands of merchants all processing and, providing them revenue. MasterCard comes down and says, you must get matched one. What is the processor going to say? No, MasterCard. Are they going to bite the hand that feeds them over one merchant?
Well, they do have obligations,
which they don't follow. No. I mean, so they're gonna rest on the side of caution, and they're just gonna match him, and so that's why you get us involved, because we stick up for you and say, hey, you need to take another look at this, and there's always the danger of litigation, and I think we've proven that we're not afraid to litigate these cases at all. I'm ready.
Well, the other thing too is when you get a notice from Visa or MasterCard saying, hey, what's up with this merchant? Instead of going, oh, we matched them, sorry. In my opinion, I think that arguably makes you look a little bit worse, because why didn't you catch this on the front end? And they're going, oh, I blame it on the merchant. I think that there is room to go back to Visa and say, I hear you. Thank you for that information. We're looking into it. They give you enough time to look into it. 2 weeks usually?
No, I've seen those letters where it literally says you do not need to take any further action at this time. But as soon as you get that letter,
they match
just investigate it, and then they backdate the termination to before they even got the letter.
Right. So I would say exactly. So I would say actually look into it and do the work, and maybe do push back and say, hey, this was an okay merchant. I hear what you're saying. Here are the reasons. And I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you still think we should do something? And won't take a stance, of course, but I think that would give you, one, a really good, working relationship with your merchant base. And let's say it is an affiliate marketer. If he sees you going to bat for him and his cousin and his brother and all of the other people he got merchant accounts for, you're going to have a friend for life.
I just think that ultimately, when you're signing up a merchant, you owe it to that merchant to give them an education that, encompasses more than just a tiny hyperlink to a website on a piece of paper.
Don't get chargebacks.
And don't get chargebacks.
The great point. To close this out, James, you talked about what sounded basically like business advisement, even for merchants who are interested in saying, hey, I don't want to end up on the match list. Should they give Global Legal a call?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there should be a conversation with your processor. Don't be so excited about getting your mid and getting live. Take a minute, because choosing, one, the wrong processor, or two, the wrong website. And quite literally, we see a lot of these. It's just like, your website sounded exactly like this one. Just change the name of the website at least. You keep your business name.
There are tons of processors out there. At least it seems like it's
because it's G2 crawling, and that's where it'll err. I'm guessing it just uses some kind of AI to crawl around and look for stuff, and it'll pop you because, like, hey, calling your, I'll say pool supply again for an example. You're calling your pool supply, green leaf pool cleaning.
Yeah, stay away from cannabis-like names. I mean, it may be legal in California, but the credit card companies are not with it.
And that's great advice. Bryce Vandermoor, Senior Associate Attorney, Global Legal Law Firm. James Huber, Managing Partner, Global Legal Law Firm. GetOffTheMatchList.com, GlobalLegalLawFirm.com. We can help you get off the match list. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Payments Experts Podcast. New episodes, first and third Thursdays. If you're interested in learning more about PEP and how Global Legal Law Firm may be able to assist you, please visit us at GlobalLegalLawFirm.com. To schedule a free consultation, give us a call at 888-846-8901 or email us at pep@attorneygl.com. And once again, thank you for listening.
1, 2,